Greetings and salutations, friends and gamers of all stripes. My name is GM Dave, your man behind the screen, and I'd like to welcome you to a very special rambling, roaming vlog. So I'm out of my local county now, I believe. Pretty sure I'm actually in Riverside County instead of my regular one. And I am driving up to my old hometown to visit one of my oldest friends. It's a guy I've known since 4th grade. His birthday was a couple days ago, so I got today off so that I could spend the day with him and his family and hopefully play some D&D, give him his first taste of 5th edition, I'm hoping. And the reason why this is kind of exciting for me, apart from the fact that he's an old friend and I haven't seen him for, about a year or two, and last time I did see him was only for a couple of hours because he happened to be working that day. But this friend of mine, along with his stepdad, are the two people who got me into D&D to begin with over 20 years ago. In fact, his stepdad ran the first ever game of D&D that he and I ever played. And a lot of my friends and family will know exactly who I'm talking about. This is my very dear, almost lifelong friend, Jimmy, and his stepdad, Steve, who ran our first ever D&D game, 3rd edition, the Sunless Citadel. So, for this vlog, basically, I'm just going to take you on the journey up to my old hometown with me. We're actually already about halfway through the journey, but I figured I would spare you guys the more boring ride up the 15 freeway. It's not as nice looking as going through some of these back roads, especially once you'll see the landscape is actually going to go through a few changes. It's pretty nice. Here we got more of the Mediterranean shrublands, the chaparral, those California chaparral shrublands going through here. But eventually we're going to start getting into the chaparral forests as we go up higher into the mountains, which will look pretty nice. So for this one, I basically just want to talk about some of my memories of playing D&D with Jimmy and some of my other childhood friends, starting of course with my memories of playing those first couple of games in the Sunless Citadel. So I remember when I first played the game, actually, I came over to Jimmy's house one weekend. It was on a Saturday, I believe. Came over one weekend. It was, I think, one of the last weeks before summer vacation started in school. We were in, I want to say, going into 7th grade, pretty sure. I think that's about right. I think we were going into 7th grade, so it was about 10 at the time. And I came over, and he and Steve were just setting up to play D&D, and Jimmy didn't. I don't believe Jimmy told me that's what they were doing. He just said like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to be playing a game with Steve. It's a lot of fun. You should come." All right, yeah, that sounds good. I figured it was a video game. I didn't know it was Dungeons and Dragons, but I'd heard about Dungeons and Dragons at that point. I thought it sounded cool. I just never had the chance to play it. So when I got over and I saw that's what it was, I was like, "Oh, cool! How do you play this?" And Steve was just calling, "Sit down. I'll show you." And so he got me into it. Now he originally, since Steve was just kind of doing this on the days when he was off work for Jimmy. Originally, it was just he and Jimmy playing it. So he made a couple of NPC characters to go along with Jimmy's rogue. So that way he wouldn't be doing a 4-man level 1 to 4 dungeon crawl by himself. And that would make it easier on Steve. He wouldn't have to completely retool the balance of the dungeon. So basically, Jimmy would play his character and one of the 3 NPCs, and then Steve would play the other 2 NPCs, not really involving them in any decision making. He left all of that to Jimmy, but he would use them to drop a hint here or there to help us along, help us figure things out, which was good since we were really young and very inexperienced at the time. So I came in, and Steve and Jimmy gave me the rundown of how the game works. They told me a bit of what's going on, and he said, oh, I've got a couple characters here, and they were a fighter, a cleric, and a wizard. And I don't remember much about the fighter or the wizard. I didn't play either of those. I went with the cleric. Because as he was describing the different characters and what they can do, I thought to myself, the cleric sounds really cool. That sounds like a really fun class to play. And it was, actually, it's funny because my first ever, I apologize for that, if the road noise is coming through a little loud. It is a bit of a rough road. But I remember, the funny thing is I've always been one of those guys who's never really had a problem playing a character of the opposite sex, even though there have been plenty of times where especially when I was younger, where I goofed it up and fell into that trap of like, oh yeah, I'm the badass female character who's like super sexy. That stupid thing that some guys do. Don't do that. That's dumb. That makes for a stupid character. I'm sorry, but it does. That makes for a really dumb way of playing your character. Unless you're doing it kind of intentionally, unless you're doing it to be a little meta and it's like a comedy game or something like that, and then that sort of thing is fine. But if you're really seriously getting into your character and you're trying to play someone of the opposite sex, and you're doing the breathy, sexy lady thing, that's dumb. Don't do that. Just, make the character as a character. But anyway, like I was saying, this first character I ever played was she was a female cleric. And it was a female elf cleric of Corellin Larethian, the god of elves in, I believe, actually Greyhawk and Forgotten Realms. Might be a couple of the other settings too. But this was, since it was 3rd edition core stuff, this all used the Greyhawk setting, which I always found, now since I learned about Forgotten Realms well after the fact and how that was the primary setting, I found it kind of surprising, actually. I was like, so 5th edition, or 3rd edition, went with Greyhawk as the primary setting for the rules in their books. That's a little interesting. Just a little something that kind of struck me a few years later on down the line as a bit surprising, since usually it goes with Forgotten Realms. But so I played this character, and I'm trying to remember her name. I only played her for 2 or 3 sessions, so her name didn't really stick with me, unfortunately. I want to say it was like Lareth or Lauren or something. I know it started with an L. I really wish I could remember, but nevertheless, I remember joining in with this game, and we were about, they were already a little bit into the dungeon, and so Steve brought me up to speed, and so did Jimmy. And I don't remember a whole lot of the dungeon crawl itself, but there are a few key moments that stand out in my mind. Now, I will admit here and now that, because obviously it's been 21 years since I played this game, so my memory is probably a little bit foggy. I know a lot of the details I know are accurate. There are a couple things that I know for absolute certain came from this module. It's really actually the final fight is what I'm a little foggy on. I can't quite remember if the final fight that I'm remembering is actually... Oh, excuse me. Hiccups. Excuse me, but I can't remember really if this final fight that I have in my head actually came from the Sunless Citadel or not. So, a little rehydrate, keep myself able to talk. It's warm today. It's only 10 and it's already climbing to a little over 80, which it's going to get a lot hotter as I go up, because I'm going to be passing through areas that get kind of close to deserty. In fact, we're getting kind of that way now, but excuse me. So the final fight of the dungeon, I can't remember if I'm actually remembering the correct one from the Sunless Citadel, or if I'm remembering one from a different dungeon, a different game. And the reason for that is because when I was doing my own dungeons, creating my first few campaigns very early on, I aped a lot of stuff from the Sunless Citadel, including what I'm pretty sure was this final fight. I aped it almost directly a lot of times, which, you know, you say what you will about that. You know, bear in mind, this is when I was very young. I was still a young teenager at the time when I was first starting these games, and I didn't know what I was doing. So this was part of the learning process for me. It was the best example I had of how to do these sorts of things, how to make dungeons. You know, all of that stuff came from, at first, playing third edition's version of Sunless Citadel. But the first moment I remember very vividly was not actually linearly. It's not the first moment that happened to me in this set of moments, but this is the one that I remember the most vividly, and it was one of the, you know, I guess you could say, boss fights in the dungeon. You know, as we were exploring the Citadel, of course, it was infested with rats, and there were a few other creatures in there, mostly like, you know, goblinoids, a couple undead. But there was a rat infestation, a giant rat infestation that the characters had kind of been having to deal with throughout. They kept running into packs of these rats who, you know, we'd kill a couple and then they'd scurry off. And eventually we came into a room just filled with all kinds of garbage and detritus, just really filthy, disgusting room. But it was one that we needed to go through to, you know, pass further down into the Citadel. And we came to realize that all this detritus was actually being gathered up in kind of deliberate piles in certain areas, and one of the characters, I think it was actually Jimmy's character, who realized it with a knowledge nature check, realized, oh, these are rats' nests. This is where the rats have been coming from. You know, and since he said that aloud, and our characters, you know, being inexperienced, we weren't exactly being super quiet, of course, that triggered the fight with the rats. And this moment stands out to me in my head because it's just one of those moments that was, you know, funny, and just one of the most perfect ways to get me introduced to D&D. And basically, Steve had set up a method by which, a very simple method, which I have used, by which he would determine how, you know, these rats would choose who they're attacking and who they're focusing on. And since there was 4 characters in the party, well, it was as simple as rolling a d4. So it just so happened that the rat queen, as Steve put it, the rat who was the mother of all these other rats, she decided to focus on my character. And just through pure luck, you know, Steve wasn't using a DM screen, so we were able to see all of the rolls. So I know there were no fudged rolls here. It was just pure luck, but the luck could not have gone better for me and could not have made for a more perfect introduction, I don't think. This rat kept trying to attack me, and she kept missing by 1, 2, 3 points. She was always almost there, just barely missing me. And Steve, every time it happened, would try to think of the most amusing way he could describe her missing me. Like, I would take a swing and miss with my sword, and then the rat would try to leap at me and bite me. And he would describe it as like, oh, I took a swing and I missed with my sword, but as you tripped, like, you swung and you missed with your sword and you tripped on a loose brick. But as you fell forward, the rat queen leapt to snap at you and leaps right over your head. Things like that. He found just, you know, things that, not the most hilarious thing when you're an adult, but as a 10-year-old kid, you find that really funny. So that stands out to me as my fondest memory of playing the Sunless Citadel, is Steve describing this boss fight and how this boss, this big, strong, giant rat, strong for our level, of course. I think at the time we were all level 2. Kept trying to eat me and just constantly missed every single time. Literally, that rat never landed a hit on anyone, and 5 of the 6 or 7 hits that she was trying to land were on me. So the little rats, like the 5 or 6 little rats she had with her, did a hell of a lot more than she did. So eventually, we get through that fight, we kill them off, and it was all good fun. And so we move on, continuing further down into the Citadel. And now that I'm thinking about it, I think I might have actually put this in chronological order, so that could well be why this thing with the rat also stands out to me so much, is because it was my first big fight experience. Low level big fight, so not really that big, but you get what I'm saying. The next moment came when, as we're descending into the underground portions of the Citadel, because we were already inside, but we were going deeper into the whole dungeon. Excuse me. The sinus is starting to act up a little bit. I apologize for that. So we descend deeper into the dungeon, and as we're going down, we get ready to make camp for the night. And so we're making our camp because it's been a long day. We just had that fight, descended down the dungeon for a couple more hours, and it's drawing late. All the characters are feeling tired, so we set up, decide who's going to be on watch. And as we're taking watch, we hear things coming down from further in the dungeon, but nothing happens that night. However, in the morning, as all the characters are waking up and everyone's kind of getting redressed and putting their armor and everything all back on, getting all prepared to continue on, Steve has us all roll listen rolls. Yeah, because for those who don't know or who don't remember, 3rd edition actually had 3 different skills that later on all kind of combined to become perception once Pathfinder came around. And I believe 4th edition they did this too. They realized that Pathfinder was doing it right. 3rd and 3.5 also had it this way too. You had, instead of perception, which allows you to search rooms, spot things, and listen for things, you had as separate skills: search, spot, and listen. So he had us all make listen checks, which was not a difficult thing to do. The creature that was coming was not making much effort, or rather creatures were not making much effort to be quiet. And we noticed that we heard footsteps kind of rushing up the tunnel ahead of us. And so our characters hurried to get their equipment on and get ready. And just as we finished getting ready, we start to see the first bunch coming up, and it's a few goblins, and they come up and they have their little crossbows, and they take aim, they start taking shots, but we still hear these bigger footsteps come, this thump, 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 running up the corridor, and Steve tells me, and you hear this battle cry, this like, or as a bugbear, and I mean, I don't know. I'm trying. He's telling us, and Steve is saying, he's like, I'm trying to think of like a good battle cry, and I can't think of something. And Jimmy tells him, I got this. And he gets up out of his chair, with my chubby friend, gets up out of his chair, starts waving his arm over his head, and we're just dying. Yes, the bugbear comes up and he does that. Oh, you mean? So for the next for the next 10 years after that, anytime Jimmy and I had a bugbear charge someone because of that moment, they went, it was so dumb, but so priceless. And as ridiculous as it was still just one of those other great moments that showed both of us where it's like, oh yeah, if the DM can't think of something, one of us can do it. We can just make something up. And, whoever's running the game could just roll with it. That's really cool. So that was really awesome. Jimmy just makes up this random noise to account for the fact that Steve couldn't think of a battle cry he liked for the bugbear, and it was fun. So screw it. Yeah, we're gonna go with it. Yeah, let's do that. The battle cry of all bugbears. But one else thing that was really cool is that actually led into a really good, tough fight. Actually might arguably have been the toughest fight we had in that dungeon, if my memory serves me correctly, apart from the boss. Or really, actually, arguably, it might have even been tougher than the boss, because I think the boss was just a single enemy by themselves. So, speaking of, that leads me to the third big memory I have of the Sunless Citadel, which was the boss. Now, again, I can't say 100% for sure that I am remembering this correctly. I've used this fight so many times that I don't honestly remember anymore if I actually got this one from the Sunless Citadel or if I aped this one in my other campaigns that I made from a different pre-made module that I ran. But whatever it was, oh, come on, old guy. Whatever one it was, the boss fight was against an orc cleric. It was down in this cavern below the citadel. We made our way down into this cave below the citadel. It was very dimly lit, and inside was an orc cleric who, who was a cleric of Grumsh, who was kind of the reason why, if I remember correctly, he was the source of the reason why the Sunless Citadel had become abandoned. Or, that could be wrong. He could have just been basically squatting there and led the goblinoids there. It's, like I said, it's been over 20 years since I played this game, so it's very, very sketchy in my head what the details were. But nonetheless, I do remember the fight really well. The strategy of the orc was basically, since he was alone, what he would do is he would, lure the players to a platform that he was on, kind of, attack them from ranged, I believe, with a crossbow to soften them up until they could reach him. And then once they reached him, he would throw up magical darkness and engage in melee, using the advantage he had of the blind fighting feat to grant himself a much better chance to hit him than the players would have, thereby making the fact that, yeah, he was higher level than the players were at that point, than the characters were. I think our characters were level 3 when we had this fight. He was level 5, so we had 2 levels on us. But without the magical darkness, it still would have been 4-on-1. Even with him being 5th level, and even with him having that spot where he was able to soften us up a bit, he would have died really quickly without that magical darkness, just by virtue of the fact that, our action economy was a lot better than his, 4 times better than his, by having a party of 4 versus 1 person. So he used magical darkness to give himself that edge, and it was a tough fight. But, in the end, we beat him and, leveled up to level 4. And at that point, I think Steve was going to actually continue with his own campaign that he made, that he was working on, for us to play those characters in. But it never happened, unfortunately. I believe just his work schedule tightened up a lot, and he wasn't able to really make the time to play. At the time, I believe he used to be a manager at a grocery store, so his schedule, he needed to change around his schedule to cover some weekends for people who weren't able to work them anymore, and that typical kind of working class stuff. And I mean proper working class, like your lower class in terms of your income, because really, that's, unfortunate as it is to say, that's what Jimmy and his family were. They were wonderful people, but, they struggled with that stuff. A lot of people do. There's no shame in it. It's just kind of unfortunate, good people. You want them to do well. But nevertheless, even though we did end up retiring the characters after that point, which was disappointing, it was still a hell of a lot of fun. And it led to, me now, here I am, 21 years later, so invested in this hobby still that I've dedicated my free time, an extra 20 to 30 hours a week to making a YouTube channel about it. And now I'm going back up to visit them and, hopefully, I'm hoping, have this whole thing come full circle, and I run a game now for Jimmy and Steve, the two guys who got me into the game to begin with. Which is not to say I've not run games for Jimmy before. We played many times together, oftentimes swapping back and forth as DMs, within our own campaigns. Because generally speaking, we had a few friends up in Idlewild. That's the town I'm going to, by the way. It's a little mountain town, tourist town. Twice the size nowadays that it was when we lived up there. It's about 4,000 people now as opposed to the 2,000 it was when we lived up there. 2,000 people, the vast majority of which were geriatrics above the age of 65. That is not to say that people who are in their 60s are geriatrics. Okay, just getting that out of the way. But we played quite a few games together, and the other one that really stands out to me is actually one that we started playing after I moved back down to San Diego from Idlewild. Yes, I don't live in San Diego currently, so don't go looking around thinking like, oh, maybe I can find his address or something like that if I look for him in San Diego. I don't live in San Diego. I don't live in that city anymore. I live, around there, but not in the city. But anyway, we moved back down there, and Jimmy would come, like, every summer. I'd go up for a couple weeks to visit him and his family, and then he'd come down for a couple weeks to visit us. It sort of became our yearly tradition. And after high school, he moved down with us for a while. Sorry about that. He moved down with us for a while. And during that time, I believe it was like during that summer, leading from our senior years after graduation into college, and then kind of through college, we played another campaign, a homebrewed one that we came up with on our own, based on Breath of Fire 3, a game that we had both grown very much to love, and that we both, to this day, still feels did not get enough of a fair shake, thanks to the fact that Final Fantasy VII came out the exact same year. And I believe really, really close to the same time, too. So, there's that. But we went as far even as, making our own races and, setting up this whole campaign world. And by this time, I had garnered a rather large collection of 3 and 3.5 edition books, thanks to my friends. That became my go-to set of gifts every year was, hey, like Dave's birthday's coming up. Oh, check it out. There's a new D&D supplement out. Let's get it for him. So, I think, I know I got a lot of them kind of packed away someplace. I got about half of them on a bookshelf, half of them packed away. I'm going to have to find whatever box they're packed away in, but I believe I've got about 27 different supplements for 3.5, including either all 5 or at least 4 of the 5 monster manuals. Strangely enough, never got the Player's Handbook 2. That sort of surprised me that my friends never picked that one up for me. But, at least 4 of the 5 monster manuals. I had Libris Mortis, the Book of Vile Darkness, the Book of Exalted Deeds, Deities and Demigods, Manual of the Planes, Complete Warrior, which was my favorite one of the books they got me, because it introduced me to the class that ended up being my favorite class, the Hexblade. and all sorts of stuff. But, we had this vast collection of books and content to draw from, so we made some cool scenarios out of those. They were a bit disparate, a bit kind of unusual, but the campaign was pretty fun. We set it up. It was like, there's this whole war going on where, demons or weirdly devils. We said it was devils low-ranking devils kept like breaking into this world that we made up for this game, and they were besieging the outlying communities of this kingdom, and their attacks were they seemed random at first, but they started becoming much more coordinated and much fiercer, and soon it was getting to the point that by all appearances, there appeared to be an army of them amassing to, come and overtake this kingdom. So our characters sort of got, we were adventurers who were just, kind of working to make our ends meet, working as adventurers and, plying our trade. Because we were all kind of, we're young, like we're high school going into college students who were fucking 90s kids, so you better believe there was a bit of edgelordiness involved with that. We're all outcasts and stuff, but, we tried not to be too edgy about that stuff, and we made a good, I felt it was a fun cast of characters, and, I remember we made characters, like I said, based off of Breath of Fire. We made up new races for them. Mine was the one that was kind of dragon-like, and much like the main characters from the Breath of Fire games, he looked human most of the time, or actually he kind of looked more half-elfish, and then would transform into a dragon-like being. And, it was like, I'll fully admit, it was actually kind of dumb. What we did was kind of dumb, and it was terribly balanced. Like, these special forms we came up with were terribly balanced. They were so overpowered. But, I mean, we made sure there were drawbacks for us, but the drawbacks just did not compare to the power that we were giving ourselves. So, we didn't know any better. But it was still a lot of fun. So, this army's been attacking, and we've been, running into it here and there, and we first got our first taste of it after, exploring an abandoned ruin on the outskirts of the kingdom. Like, our characters at the time didn't really know about this situation because, like I said, they were just working as adventurers for hire, and there was a small town that had been having trouble with, goblins and other less than savory creatures, at least in this world, less than savory, who were like ransacking their food store, fans, things like that. And they suspected it was coming from the ruins of an old fort that was, some ways up the road. And we ran into goblins and stuff and explored this little dungeon we put together, and it was kind of cool. I remember actually one thing Jimmy did, because he set up this first portion of the game, and one thing he did, since it was just he and I playing, is he actually brought back some old characters we were playing with when, because we had a few year gap of being able to play D&D because of when Steve had to stop running games for us. So throughout a good chunk of middle school, we weren't really able to play too much beyond an occasional one-shot that we made up here or there. But Steve started playing, we started playing more in freshman year in high school with some other people. And for this game, after, we'd been playing it over, I think we started it actually, this game, in the summer of our junior year, and then during, breaks and stuff, when we would get a chance to visit one another, we'd continue. But when he moved back down to live with us, while going to college with me, was when we really started playing this a lot. But he made up this first portion of it, and this was one of those instances where we went through the dungeon, and Who was the boss? Well, it was the same orc from the Sunless Citadel. This was one of those instances where, like, oh yeah, you know, we aped from Sunless Citadel because it was a good boss fight that we knew how to run, and you know, all that stuff. So even though we knew the strategy and stuff, it was still a good, challenging boss fight because our characters weren't set up in such a way to really counteract his abilities. We just sort of had to fight through it. So we do that, and from there, that's when we kind of started learning about the demon army. And throughout devil army, throughout this campaign, we're going along, and now we start running into more like groups of devils and different things. We started having like more crazy stuff happen. Some of the stuff that we had happen was just crazy for the sake of crazy. But, you know, for the most part, we tried to sort of keep some sort of a semi-coherent story going on. It really felt more like kind of an episodic adventure sort of thing. We didn't really have an overarching plot in mind, just sort of adventures vaguely strung together by this idea of this devil army. So, at a certain point, we end up, you know, our characters are, you know, we meet with, we get brought in by the army of whatever kingdom it was that we came up with, and we meet with one of their generals, and then eventually meet with a couple of their rulers, because, you know, rumors have started to spread a bit about how, like, this group of 4 guys have been, or this group of 4 people, like 3 men and 1 woman, have been fighting these devils and actually, like, successfully killing off some of these packs of devils that have been haranguing their countryside. So they bring us in, and, you know, they're wanting to know, like, you know, what's your business here? Like, you know, what are you guys doing? And we're just adventurers for hire. You know, these were, you know, like, these things were happening. We thought it was kind of messed up, so we fought them, and, you know, trying to make a living doing this. So since we were doing well, they brought us in to their army to sort of help, you know, act as foot soldiers if we wanted. So we're like, all right, yeah, you know, we'll help with that. Since we've got more experience fighting devils than these guys, you know, we'll sort of use what we've learned fighting them to help them out. And through that, you know, we start going on more bigger skirmishes with the devils, using like army fighting, like army combat rules from one of the books that I got, kind of expanding on that. And eventually it got to the point where we did become battlefield commanders. Like, we each had our own individual units that we were leading. Each unit specialized in something different. One of the characters was a paladin, so he was leading a unit of like proper soldiers and knights, things like that. I think it was actually he was leading a cavalry unit. My character was a ranger who went into this was before it actually became a monk archetype in 5th edition, and I don't remember what archetype it was in Pathfinder. I don't remember what class archetype it was, but I'm pretty sure it was an archetype instead of a prestige class. But at the time, it was a prestige class. I went into the Kensai, and that was actually a lot of fun. Like, it was a little difficult, a little bit challenging to meet the requirements for the prestige class, but once I did meet them, it was a lot of fun. It was well worth it. And that, for a long time, was my favorite character to play. So we get to the point where we're sort of battlefield commanders, like lower-ranking battlefield commanders for this army. We each have kind of a specialized unit. My character was a ranger. I specialized in actually using polearm fighting. I used a glaive, so I was actually setting up more of a defensive line and things like that. Pikemen and those sorts of things. Jimmy was playing a rogue again, so his was a small band of infiltrators, and the other character we had, I believe, it was a guy. It was a monk, and he was leading, weirdly enough, he was leading, actually, I think, what was he doing? It was... Oh, no, that's right. Yeah, at the time we only had 3 characters. The monk came in after we had this group. After we had earned our status as battlefield commanders. So the fourth character actually came in later, and we did this character because I wanted to mess with some of the monster prestige classes from Savage Species, even though that really wasn't quite compatible with 3.5. It was a 3rd edition book, and a lot of the stuff in it was actually made obsolete by 3.5, but, you know, I didn't have anything equivalent to 3.5, and I still wanted to use it, so fuck it. So we basically fought our way up to this fortress that the devils had taken, and they were using undead minions as well, this particular group. So we fought our way in, or, you know, we fought off the army of devils. Our party did, of course, you know, the fight against the big bad, but in the lead up to the fight against the big bad, there was a shade we had to fight. Actually, it was a group of 4 shades, I believe. And there was, like, you know, we didn't know the difference between them yet. I had set up this fight. I didn't point out the difference, but any clear differences between them to Jimmy, and I didn't tell him that I was making this monk character, but we determined eventually that one of the shades had basically created the other 3, and the paladin who Jimmy was playing figured if we destroy that shade first, it will at the very least probably weaken the other shades. I don't think that was I don't think that was a actual rule at the time, but we rolled with it. So he destroyed that shade. They ended up killing 2 of the other 3 shades, and then the 3rd shade, when like everyone was like moving to attack it, it had been lashing out at us like a monk would, because that was the monk character. So he, like, the group was about to fight it, and he's like, wait, please don't, you know, and basically explained that he himself had actually heard of these devils some months ago, and his monastery had been preparing to defend itself against them, but because his monastery used to be in the area, but they were overrun, most of them were killed. He and a few others managed to escape, and they wanted to both get revenge on the devils for destroying their home and killing a lot of their, like, friends, and wanted to stop them just because, you know, hey, these things are destroying lives. We can still fight. We should do what we can. And most of the monks died. So they actually had attacked that fort as well a few days beforehand. Most of them died, and 3 of them, including this one, got turned into those shades. He was the only one that hadn't fully changed. So when that shade died, we gave him levels in the Emancipated Spawn prestige class, because the Master Shade was destroyed, so he became emancipated. You know, so we had a very unusual group going on here. But so at a certain point, you know, that happens, we clear out this place, and then we're leading up into the final showdown against, like, the brunt of this army. And even though at this point we were battlefield commanders, the people who were leading the army came to us and they said, hey, you guys have had the most experience dealing with these things, and you guys have, you know, held your own, not only held your own against them, but you've shown that you guys are pretty good at scouting things out, getting in without being detected. So we're going to have other people lead these bands that we put together for you guys, because we need you guys to scout out the army before we attack. So we did that. We scouted out the army, and we got pinned down inside of, again, the ruins of an area that they had attacked. We were pinned down, actually, in the ruins of an old wizard's tower that was in the area. So we were kind of trapped inside and sort of holding up for about a full day. We had sent out a messenger. I think one of us had like one of those little magical idols, little magical statues that could transform into a bird, raven idol I think it was. Sent it out to deliver the message of, hey, you know, we're pinned down, we found the army, we need help. So we sent the message out, and after a day and a half, the army came out, and we'd been holding up in there, and, you know, fortunately, like, we lucked out in that there wasn't a whole lot of things attacking us. They were more focused on being ready for invading the kingdom than they were on being like, hey, you know, let's waste a bunch of resources breaking into this tower, this dilapidated tower, to kill these 4 guys. No, they were just going to sit there and wait us out because they knew, like, yeah, your supplies are limited. You're not going to be able to last more than a few days. They didn't know that we had the connection to the army. So the army comes, and we have this whole dramatic thing where it's like, oh yeah, you know, we each had like this dramatic reveal where we would step out from the ruins and, you know, Deadpool style, strike a pose. You know, very dramatic. It was dumb. I fully admit it was dumb, but it was, you know, it was fun. It was amusing. So we do that, and these devils, like this devil army, starts encroaching on us, and then from over the rolling hills behind us, the armies of this kingdom, plus actually an allied kingdom, a neighboring kingdom, who had volunteered their forces to help because of the problem that they saw this devil army presenting, comes rolling over the hill, and this huge clash starts. So we take assisting command of our units again, and start fighting through the devils. And at a certain point, the battlefield general, contacts us with a message spell and says, I need you guys to get in that tower. Their commander's inside there. We need to take him out. Like, we'll clear a path. You guys get in and get rid of them. So we get in. We fight the commander, which wasn't a devil. I can't remember what kind of creature it was. It was it was a lizard man-esque creature, but they were these, like they ate magic or something. I can't recall exactly what they were. I think they came from the Fiend Folio, if my memory serves me correctly. I just can't really remember what they were called, but they seemed like pretty neat creatures, so I figured that'd be a cool idea if 2 of these things were actually, like, you know, using these minor devils, found some way to, like, keep these minor devils as thralls. So these devils are having to fight this stupid war that they want no part of. They're more interested still in fighting the Blood War and against the Celestials and corrupting mortals. But they're forced to fight in this war under the servitude of these 2 weird, like, magic-eating lizard men things, you know, against their will. So we kill them, and the army of devils is routed. A lot of them just sort of, like, you know, flee the battlefield and try to find their way back to hell. But where we found them was in inside, you know, again, it was a fortress that they had taken very early on in their campaign, and they had heavily refortified it. And the central building, the central keep, there was a tower they had built onto it. And at the top of this tower, they had a gateway, a device that opened a gateway into hell. Like, it would open this gateway in the chamber they were in, which then connected to a much larger gateway in the keep itself, which was how they were funneling devils through. Like, basically, these linked gateways enabled them to funnel these massive number of lower-ranking devils through against their will. So we came to find out that there actually was apparently an agent in hell, a greater devil that was working with these creatures to engage in this conflict. And it was all part of the politicking of hell, of the 9 hells, which is a very frequent thing in the D&D world. So we decide, you know what? Let's hunt this guy down. Let's find out who's doing this. And so we cross the portal, and we enter hell at level 8. Yeah. I purposefully saved the detail of what level we were doing this at for right now. At level 8, we sent our characters to hell. What the fuck were we thinking? Amazingly, we made it out alive, but, you know, we were attempting to get, because we found out that the mastermind, this devil who was leading this stuff, was apparently somewhere in either the 8th or 9th layer. So we were trying to get there, but because we weren't attuned to this portal, we all got spat out at a random layer. And we rolled, we found a way to make it random. It wasn't with a dice, because obviously there's not a 9-sided die. But I think we did it with a D8. Like, we weren't going to have it be possible that we would end up on the 9th layer, but we could end up between layers 1 through 8. So we ended up on layer 4, inside of this giant volcanic caldera. And, you know, so we're having to deal with environmental hazards and having to find sneak our way through hell and try to avoid fights with much more powerful creatures than we can take on. And we managed to do that fairly successfully for the most part, and eventually we make it down. We find the way down from the 4th layer into the 5th layer, which is one of the 2 frozen layers, and I believe it's the layer where the archdevil Levistus was imprisoned. So we find our way to his lair, and we're trying to figure out some way that we can get down to the 8th or 9th layer and start finding this devil, because we found the means to and here we are coming into the town. Very close to finding my friend. But anyway, we found a means of navigating our way through hell, because the 2 creatures had those means on them, and we were using a map that they had, a magical map, to sort of pick our way through hell. But what we needed to find was the river Styx, because something else that they had on them that they had kept, which was something that they had used to be able to negotiate with those, or find their way to and negotiate with that devil, was a folding boat. It was a boat that you could just fold up and stick in your pocket. And so we had taken that, and we were going to use it to sail down the river Styx all the way down to either the 8th or 9th layer, and the map was going to let us know when we would find the devil. So we make our way across this frozen wasteland now, from a volcanic wasteland to a frozen wasteland, and start going down. We run into a strong devil. But it was a boss fight that had happened to be like traveling near the river Styx. I can't remember even why we decided it was, but we do that, fight it, and we start sailing down, and eventually we do find the guy who is the devil who's doing this, and it turns out it's a devil who possessed a human and was living in hell with this human body. He possessed this, he was an ancient heroic warrior. And so they're fighting, and my turn's actually up here, but I'm going to go ahead and drive around a little bit longer just to finish up this story. So they're fighting, the party starts fighting him, and he, at first, like, he basically, kicks our ass. He's quite a few levels higher than us, but, we're doing all right against him because it's, a 4-on-1 situation. But, we end up having to retreat because he's got reinforcements coming. So we have to figure out a way to basically isolate this guy and get him killed. And so we're thinking, well, one of the other reasons we came down here was not just to find the mastermind, but also to stop the potential flow of future devils into the material plane, because the portals are still open, and we had a portal key that needed to be smashed we needed to find a place where we could destroy it. It was very much a Sauron in the Ring kind of thing, the One Ring kind of thing. So I aped this from Diablo 2. For those who are aware, there's a point where you fight the boss Mephisto and you get his soul stone. You have to go to a special forge in hell to destroy his soul stone. Same thing. So we do that, and this devil finds out that we're doing this, and he cuts us off at the head. He finds us at the forge. He's got a small group of devils with him, and this fight ensues. But we managed to smash the stone in the midst of the fight. One of the characters manages to actually destroy the stone on the forge in the midst of the fight, and the surge of power that was unleashed kills those other devils, wounds us really badly too, and really severely wounds the devil and the guy who he's possessed by. And this guy starts waking up. He starts becoming cognizant again. And he tells us, he's like, he starts begging us. He's like, I don't have very long before he comes back. You need to kill me. His fate is bound to mine. When he took my body centuries ago, his life became bound to mine. You must kill me now, or else he will come back and you will die. And he's looking specifically at our paladin, basically saying, your holy magic is the only way this is going to work. So our paladin is forced into this dilemma where he has to decide, do I kill this innocent man to destroy this devil? And eventually he decided yes. So he killed the man. But unfortunately, when that happened, that opened up a way for us to escape hell. But he ended up trapped in hell. He was not able to get away. So we escaped, but we lost our paladin. However, for this crazy adventure, well, I'm just going to have to finish this story another time because I've only got 15 seconds left. That's all for today, folks. I'll finish this another time. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining me. Take care. Whoa, wait, hold on. It's still going. Is it still going? I don't know if it's actually still recording or not. If it is still recording, then I take back the I'll see you later. But basically, because we pretty much stopped a war